Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hi, Professor Dershowitz.
Hi.
All right, so let's get started. Right here on this program, a few weeks ago, you talked about a speech you were invited to, gave at the University of California, Berkeley. Now, this event was not just any speech, because it included two issues you care deeply about: freedom of speech and defending Israel on campus. Now, you were ready to sue for the right to appear, but it turned out that your speech went off without a hitch. That event is still making headlines, though, because of an uproar about anti-Semitic and anti-Israel reactions. So let's hear from Ada Forer, a student at Berkeley who was at your speech.
Hi, my name is Ada Forer, and I'm a student at UC Berkeley. I'm also the co-president of Tikva, the Zionist Voice on campus, and 2 weeks ago I had the honor of being one of the moderators during your talk, Professor Dershowitz, at our campus, which was titled The Liberal Case for Israel. Our campus had quite a response to your talk, and this week the Daily Cal, the student newspaper, published an anti-Semitic cartoon. It's very Nazi-like, very primitive, vile, and a lot of students are outraged by this. It honestly looks like it could have come from the Daily Stormer or any neo-Nazi website. So my question is, where does freedom of speech end and incitement to hate crime or violence begin? What is the legality of this, and how do we combat it on campus?
Well, thank you for your great question and for your questions that you asked during the time that I was at Berkeley. Look, freedom of speech includes freedom to be hateful, and the cartoon, as vile and despicable as it was, is protected by freedom of speech, particularly since Berkeley is a public university. The newspaper that published it claims to be the newspaper of record for the city of Berkeley. And of course, they had the right to publish this vile cartoon. They also had the right not to publish the cartoon, and they made a decision to publish it. My response has been not to try to suppress it or to try to censor it, but to actually publicize it, let it be seen around the world, and let the people, the artists, the anti-Semitic artists who drew it, the bigoted editors who allowed it to be published, let them be held responsible in the public opinion. Let them have to answer to employers and to universities that they apply to. Let them be held accountable for what they've done. The university has done the right thing. The chancellor of the university issued a strong statement condemning the vile caricature. The dean of the law school issued a statement condemning the swastika that had been drawn on my face on a poster. But the important point to remember is the speech I was making was a very centrist speech. I started out by saying that I support a state for the Palestinian people based on a compromise, negotiated peace with security for Israel. And yet, even my moderate speech is protested by grotesque anti-Semitic symbols such as the swastika and the kind of spider-like caricature of me stomping on a Palestinian child and holding in my hand an IDF soldier who was murdering a Palestinian youth in cold blood. Let the world know that these caricatures exist, that there are students at the University of California at Berkeley who subscribe to this form of bigotry, and let them be held accountable. I am not afraid of the truth, and I'm not even afraid of falsehoods as long as I have an opportunity to respond with truth. The best answer to falsehoods is truth, not censorship.
Thanks, Professor. I mean, I can only imagine what it must have felt like to see something like that. Well, joining us now in the studio is Leah Lanz, who works for Camera on Campus, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America. Now, Leah, can you tell me, how Camera got involved in this specific case at Berkeley and maybe some of your previous experience on that campus?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me, first of all. So our students are always constantly monitoring the issues on the ground on every campus, particularly in the US, but across the world. And we had spoken with our students there at the campus, including one of our former Camera fellows, prior to the event happening, and arranged for them to attend the event and to monitor it for any issues, and they will be following up with a response in their campus paper, the same paper that this cartoon was in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, go ahead. Did you want to say something, Professor?
Camera does great work. Committee for Accuracy in Media Reporting in the Middle East, they are phenomenal. They are started in Boston. I was on their original board. They do work all over the world and particularly on college campuses. And I just think it's very important to expose these things. Some of them occur secretly. There have been worse cartoons of me that appeared in smaller newspapers, grotesque Nazi-like cartoons, and they don't get the attention that Berkeley gets, and Berkeley should get it because it's training our future leaders. And if students see these kinds of things without responses from truth-telling people, they may come to believe that some of these things are actually accurate, and of course they're not.
Now, Leah, I'd also like to ask you, what is Camera doing to defend Israel on other campuses around the United States and maybe even around the world?
Sure, of course. So we have students, like I said, monitoring issues for positive and negative Israel-related activity across the U.S. and in the U.K. now, especially as well. For example, just last spring, we had a news come that Linda Sarsour would be speaking on campus at Dartmouth. And so what we did is we prepared our students with research from our team of researchers, and we provided flyers for the students to distribute on campus. And not only that, but we had a student who is now a Camera Fellow this year. We had him ask Linda Sarsour a question at her event during the Q&A period, during which she was absolutely unable to answer the question, and her response to him was, well, you're a white man. So it was a very great opportunity for us to be able to expose this woman for her hypocrisy when it comes to women's rights.
Yeah, well, it's just interesting because it comes down to education. That's essentially what you're trying to do, is educate students. And obviously, Professor Dershowitz, you've been trying to do a lot of work on this and spread that memo, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of work, but remember, too, that it also exposes the double standard. The Berkeley newspaper, the Cow, would never have published a cartoon comparably hateful of women, of blacks, of gays, of Muslims. So they can't hide behind freedom of speech. They can't say, well, we had an obligation to publish this. They had no obligation. Freedom of speech is freedom to publish or not to publish if you're a newspaper. And I challenge the Cow, and I've done it in an op-ed that I've written to them, and let's see if they actually believe in freedom of speech and publish my op-ed. But in my op-ed, I challenge them as to whether they would have published a comparably vicious cartoon that caricatured in this way a woman or a black man or a black woman or a gay person or a transgendered person, and what the university would have done in response. There would have been outrages, there would have been marches, there would have been demonstrations all over the campus. And all we have here is, yes, an appropriate response from the dean of the law school and the chancellor of the university, and praise to them for doing it. But we don't have responses from left-wing students, left-wing student organizations. The organization Students for Justice for Palestine took that cartoon and put it on their website, promoting it. And so they wouldn't promote something that was a stereotype of any other group. And so we see very visibly a double standard when it comes to anti-Semitism and hate speech toward Jews practiced on many university campuses.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, Leah, and we're just going to have to wait and see what happens, right, regarding this specific case.
Thank you.
All right, now we'd like to turn to our next guest, well-known criminal lawyer Sharon Nahari, who is also an international expert in criminal law. He's here to discuss an issue which is threatening the very foundation of Israeli democracy. After returning for its fall session, the first issue that the Knesset turned its attention to is a new bill that would restrict the criminal investigation of a sitting prime minister. Now, Sharon, we'd like you to address this issue.
Okay, accordingly, what we read, that there is a new bill suggesting that the police will be forbidden to investigate the prime minister. And this is because what we see nowadays, that Benjamin Netanyahu investigate about all the things that the police say in the newspaper regarding getting presents from other people. And the new bill said that excluding offenses like sex, rape, or bribery, security offenses, they can not investigate Prime Minister.
What do you think of that?
Well, there are two sides of that, because on the one side, a democracy based on, investigate everyone. It can be general, it can be Prime Minister, and it can be every people. On the other hand, it can be influence from other politics and from other sides that people can lead, that there will be investigation about things like presents and things like that people give presents to a Prime Minister, etc. And this can be harm for the continuance of the operation of the Prime Minister.
So, I mean...
So there are two sides. One hand, it's legitimate to investigate Prime Minister, but on the other hand, certain kind of offenses, it's a problem to investigate it in the middle of his job, because actually it's interrupt to do his job, and it's hurt the citizen on the other hand. So there are two sides of this.
Absolutely. Now, Professor Dershowitz, I know you want to respond. Before you respond, I want to make sure you touch on how this relates to the American scene as well, with Donald Trump, who is also kind of facing a similar battle of sorts.
Well, there's one enormous difference between Israel and the United States. And that in Israel, everything investigated is immediately leaked by the police. The police engage in unlawful, unethical leaking of information, often for political reasons. And so what you have are investigations that become extremely political. They take the form of a legal coup d'etat. And many of the police are very much opposed to the current government. They could be opposed to any government. And they have in their hands the ability to leak information selectively. And those leaks become first-page stories in the local newspapers. So I think it's the leaks that's the largest part of the problem. And then the police can choose to investigate even the most trivial of offenses. So I generally support the idea that prosecution of a sitting prime minister should be deferred until after that prime minister leaves office. Obviously, there have to be exceptions if there are ongoing crimes that endanger the national security or endanger individual women or endanger people's health and welfare. That's one thing. But if there are crimes of the kind that are being investigated, alleged crimes of the kind that are being investigated right now, I think they ought to be deferred. The statute of limitations could be extended, and they ought to wait until the prime minister is an ordinary citizen, not the prime minister, because an election should not be overturned by the actions of individual police officers who may have an agenda. But I want to focus on the major problem in Israel, which we don't have in the United States as much, and that is selective leaking. Whatever else you may say about Mueller, who is now running the investigation of President Trump, we have not seen leaks come from the grand jury. It's a crime, of course, to leak grand jury information. What we see is speculation, but we don't see leaks. And so I think in the United States, you cannot prosecute a sitting president until after he leaves office. You can impeach the president. In Israel, the same thing is true. You could have a vote of no confidence of a prime minister. But the idea of allowing individual police officers or individual prosecutors to undo an election endangers democracy. And that's why I wrote my book called Trumped Up, How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. And in the book, I have a chapter on what's going on in Israel. I would be making the same argument, by the way, if Hillary Clinton were president or if the Labor Party or somebody else were prime minister of Israel. This is not about individual people. It's about the office of the prime ministership and the office of the presidency.
Well, I have a question for both of you, and you can decide who answers this first. But, what do you say to those who are saying that not curbing or not going after prime ministers who are engaging in a certain type of corruption, like the charges we're seeing against Prime Minister Bibi, Prime Minister Netanyahu right now, is essentially allowing future prime ministers and future officials to continue to engage in such corruption?
No, you don't, because you go after them once they leave office. And if they've committed crimes, look, Prime Minister Olmert went to prison. The president of Israel went to prison. Israel has one of the toughest systems of not holding anybody above the law. The question is not whether. The question is when. The question is whether you can undo an election. Remember, in Israel also, there's a tradition, if you're indicted, you leave office. That's only a tradition. There's no law about that. But it's wrong. An indictment alone carries with it a presumption of innocence, and nobody should have to leave office just because they're indicted. And remember, this affected not only Olmert and now affecting Netanyahu, it also affected Prime Minister Rabin, who had to leave office at a very, very critical time because his wife had a small bank account in the United States. That did not help Israel. That did not promote.
That's right. I agree with Professor Dershowitz. I agree with that. And also, in the bill, they excluded the statute of limitation and they freeze it only after he finished his job as a prime minister. That is a good idea, I think, but as a general proposal, I think we need to see exactly what the bill said, and if it's exclude all the hard offenses, like Professor Dershowitz said, sexual, security, drugs, etc., I think we can wait. We don't need to run away. If the public are not running away to do a new election because he got a new pen or a present, a nice pen or a nice wine, then the public is okay with it. It's not a criminal. We need to understand criminal is very hard things. It's not always to run to criminal procedure is not a good idea for the democracy as well.
Yeah, well, Israel's Attorney General, Avichai Mandelblit, actually came out with in a very unusual statement. He came out with a strong statement about this proposed bill even before the Knesset began its deliberation. And he's calling it inappropriate, absurd. What is your reaction to this intervention of his?
Well, first of all, I think Avichai Mandelblit is one of the great people in Israel. He's a phenomenal attorney general. He's a wonderful man. I've known him since he was a young judge advocate general. I've worked with him on matters over the years, and I would always take very seriously anything he said. But I'd like to see what proposal he would make for eliminating the problem of criminalizing political differences. Look, today it's Avichai Mandelblit who's the Attorney General, and I trust him, and many of us trust him. Tomorrow it could be somebody else who has a political bent, unlike Avichai Mandelblit. And when you pass rules, you pass them not for the best of people, but for the worst of people.
I agree with that, because the only thing is why to do it now? Why to investigate now? Why not to wait? If you have freezing the statute of limitation, there is no problem to collect the evidence, but not to interrupt to the main suspect, which is sometimes someone serious like the prime minister. It can wait. It's harm a lot.
Well, but I mean, the prime minister himself would also be aware that this was going on, that there was an ongoing investigation while he was a sitting prime minister, right? Wouldn't it in some way impact his ability to carry out his job?
First of all, they can do it undercover. It doesn't have to be like Professor Dershowitz said, someone go to investigation and tomorrow you see it on the news. It can be an undercover investigation like usually they do all over the countries. I don't understand why it need to be straight and straightforward and to call him, to give a witness, to give a testimony about an expensive pen he got from someone that contribute a lot to Israeli country, or why he get a wine, or why his wife go to here and there, a nice hotel. This can wait. It's not.
The best example, the worst example of this was President Clinton, who was doing a great job, and they were investigating him for having an inappropriate sexual relationship, consensual, in the Oval Office, and it really hurt his presidency. It deflected attention from him. He had to testify. He had to testify in civil trials. He had to testify in front of the grand jury.
At the end of the day, it's hurt the people. It's hurt the people. He cannot do his job.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Nahari. We have to move on to our next topic. We can't seem to get this ongoing scandal off of our minds. The prominent American film producer Harvey Weinstein has been accused by dozens of women of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. Many of these women are, in fact, household names, from Angelina Jolie to Ashley Judd to Gwyneth Paltrow. And our next question comes from Avia Chudakov, who lives here in Israel.
Hi, my name is Avia. I'm 26, living in Tel Aviv, and currently an aspiring psychiatrist. What I wanted to ask you today was, since the range of these crimes and the nature of allegations are so wide and horrific, from Weinstein forcing these women to watch him masturbate, verbal abuse, and rape, where does the law draw the line for these acts to become criminal? How does the law distinguish between these different shades of gray? Thank you.
We're seeing major changes in the law as we speak. We're seeing statute of limitations expanded. We're seeing what used to be regarded as civil matters of sexual harassment being turned into crime. We have to strike an appropriate balance. We're seeing on college campuses some false accusations, some accusations that result in expulsion of students that in the end weren't true. We're seeing shifting of the burden of proof on college campuses. It was doubled out, then it became by a preponderance, and now universities will have the ability to decide what standards themselves to have. We're living through major changes, and most of them are for the good. I think we're making public what too many people knew in private, that there were power differentials and sexual harassments in the film business, in academia, in politics, in Silicon Valley. And I think that the exposure of these is very, very positive. But I think we have to also make sure that there's fairness for all involved, fairness for those accused, because there are sometimes false accusations, fairness for the victims who have suffered grievously and often silently for this. I think on balance, we're seeing a positive development, and I suspect we'll see far fewer cases of actual harassment and other kinds of sexual assault in the years to come, because there is a powerful weapon out there, and that is public exposure. The New York Times, the New Yorker, and prosecutors are now getting involved. There are investigations ongoing of some of these allegations, and some of them may result in criminal prosecutions because the statute of limitations has been expanded from 5 years in some instances to 10, and in some instances no statute of limitations at all. So we're living through a change, and I think the change, for the most part, is positive, but one has to always be careful about striking the proper balance between aggressive prosecution and protection of civil liberties.
Now, Harvey Weinstein would be a high-profile client with a lot of money for any lawyer, so why is he having particular trouble getting his due process?
He picked the worst possible team of lawyers to represent him. He picked one lawyer who quit in the middle. He picked another lawyer who was always out to protect himself rather than the client. It's remarkable to me, over 50 years, how many prominent people have picked the worst lawyers. Bill Clinton initially picked a terrible lawyer who, instead of settling the case with Paula Jones, allowed him to testify under oath about his sex life, thereby leading to his impeachment. I remember Woody Allen picking not very good lawyers, and so many prominent people, A, pick not so good lawyers, and B, tell their lawyers what to do. They won't listen to their lawyers. And so I think we've seen people creating problems for themselves in addition to the problems they created by their underlying conduct. But it shocks me all the time when I see very prominent people going to lawyers who do not serve their interests or the interests of our legal system.
Would you defend Harvey Weinstein?
I can't. I represented Miramax many years ago when they needed a change in the rating of certain movies, and I appeared for them in front of the Motion Picture Association of America. So I think I would probably have a conflict of interest representing Harvey Weinstein, because he may be the subject of proceedings against him by the various companies that he's been involved in. So I'm going to leave this one to other lawyers.
All right. Well, you know, another question for you is going back to the issue of where you draw the line, you know, between people who are so obviously guilty, which, you know, seems to be the case with Harvey Weinstein here, and cases which may be...
Well, guilty of what? You have to ask yourself, guilty of what? Just because he's guilty of sexual harassment doesn't necessarily mean he's guilty of rape. Rape is a very, very different kind of crime, far, far more serious. And I think we have to see the evidence. We have to subject it to scrutiny, cross-examination before we jump to conclusions about what he may be guilty of. He's acknowledged that he engaged in inappropriate conduct of a sexual harassment type toward women, but he's claimed that they were all consensual. Only the evidence will determine whether that's true or not.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Professor Dershowitz. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. And thank you so much to our guests. If you would like to ask Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to ILTV or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.